August 11th saw the release of Final Fantasy XIV's long-awaited 5.3 patch update, which finally brought an end to the Shadowbringers storyline and began the transition over to the next yet-to-be-announced expansion. It seemed like a really tall order to wrap everything up about Shadowbringers' narrative in a neat little bow in just one patch, even with the announcement beforehand that it was going to have a lot of cutscenes, but to my absolute lack of shock, Yoshi P and his talented team of storytellers managed to pull it off. Until now, it was arguable which expansion was the best, Heavensward or Shadowbringers, and personally I kinda leaned towards the latter, but honestly it's a fairly difficult choice overall, because they're both amazing smorgasbords of content, story-related and otherwise. However, I honestly think 5.3 pushes the advantage into Shadowbringers' possession. This update, with only about 5 hours or so of story content, made me feel more emotions than most open-world action games can do in 40. Now obviously there's more to the patch than just story stuff, but as a heavily story-focused MMO, I want to talk about the story first and foremost. It should go without saying there's spoilers in this video, so if you haven't played 5.3 yet, I suggest you do so. You'll be doing yourself a favor. It's fantastic. Unfortunately, I don't have my first playthrough gameplay to show you guys because I didn't think to record it as I wasn't planning to do a video about it initially. Sorry about that. This means I don't have like my actual in-the-moment reactions to show you either. Not that it would be interesting anyway because I'm the type of person who just stares in quiet awe when I'm surprised by something. But I'll talk about my initial impressions about things to make up for it. So let's get into it. So the first big what the fuck moment in 5.3 is the single-player story instance that you do down in Amarant, where Elidibus, still in Ardbert's body like the corpse-stealing Ascian that he is, basically forces you to do a little mini-dungeon of sorts to prove that you're as big of a hero as people say you are and worth his effort. And I was definitely expecting some shenanigans from him considering the name of the mission, but not exactly what he actually threw out. The man basically went back and retold the Warrior of Light's entire story, forcing you to fight doppelgangers of friends and old foes, and it was actually really weird seeing the old 2.x models and combat styles of the other Scions. I actually have a couple of alt characters I haven't touched in a minute who are still in the early game, but regardless, it feels like an eternity since I've last seen cleaned up rogue class Thancred. And there was Lys, back under the guise of Ida, and Papalymo as well. And after the fight you see Waking Sands Era Minfilia, who always strikes me with nostalgia when I see her, even in that trial that occasionally pops up in the roulette where you have to fight Nabrialas to save her. Even Moan Brita came back, who I do remember and miss despite her comparatively little screen time that she received. Afterward, Elidibus makes you fight the Crystal Braves Betrayers, who are, without question, the biggest pieces of shit in the whole game to me. And yes, I know Xenos exists. I would gladly kill Ilbert 1,000 times over before I even feel a pang of boredom. Fuck that guy. We also pass by Hershafont, whose appearance will definitely stab people in the chest a little bit. It's good we weren't forced to fight him too. And after that we fight mimics of Lucia, Aymeric, and Raubon, and we haven't seen the former two at all since before Shadowbringers even came out, so having their first appearances in this expansion be this makes me kind of annoyed at Elidibus. Maybe that's the point. And then we pass by Ysael and Hraesvelgr. We fight Nidhogg in his absolutely badass humanoid form. Then we continue on to Stormblood characters where we fight Hien, Yugiri, and Xenos. The instance is, in short, a summary of the Warriors of Light whole journey up until now, but from the perspective of someone who hates you and wants you to kill your friend so you understand how he feels about your hunt to stop the Ascians, stooping so low as to shove your dead friends in your face. Basically, it was the best story instance in the entire game. After that, it's casually announced that Elidibus is, in essence, a primal himself. Specifically a primal clone, I guess, of the real Elidibus who sacrificed himself to save his world. And because of this, he suffers from a primal-like one-track mind of fulfilling his mission, even though he barely remembers what his mission is and who gave it to him. Pretty crazy shit. And next up is the new story dungeon included with the update, the Hero's Gauntlet. And sort of like how the story instance was a retelling about the Warrior of Light's journey, the Hero's Gauntlet is somewhat like a retelling of the whole group's time in Norvrant, in a manner that is heavily reminiscent of the Gimlet Dark. And as we all know, Gimlet Dark is fucking awesome. You travel between areas of the world, going from Amarang to Ilmeg to Lakeland, fighting away strange specters of light while being assisted by other story characters you meet along the way, including the Feyfolk, the Miners, the Crystarium job quest givers, and, most shockingly in my opinion, Ankhthon, the final boss of the Donmeg dungeon. When that's done, you finally head back to the Crystal Tower to confront Elidibus, and it's basically confirmed that the specters you've been killing the entire time are indeed heroes from other worlds that he's manipulated into doing his dirty work, which is super fucked up. You've been basically slaughtering your own brainwashed peers. So Elidibus summons more of them and siphons their power and desire for salvation to transform into the Warrior of Light. Not you, the player, who is also called Warrior of Light, but the Warrior of Light, the first Warrior of Light, who may or may not have actually existed in the way that you see him in the fight, meaning you're probably battling an idealized form of him, or as Elidibus himself puts it, Light Incarnate. Crazy shit. So you fight the Warrior of Light, and after the first phase, you partake in a little QTE event, which leads to a false ending where the whole team looks doomed, but you're brought back by a remnant of Emmet Selk, who I presume wants you to just free his friend from his mindless pursuit of his so-called mission, which is a great final send-off for that character, a nice little cherry on top to his own personal arc, driving home the point that he really does just wants what's best for his peers. Then you finish the fight, and then Raha reveals that the Crystal Tower is basically one big white auracite and then traps Elidibus' soul inside, leaving behind a tiny fragment of his normal self that you interact with before he finally disappears. The trial itself is really cool, and I was able to survive my first go at it with barely a scratch, thanks largely in part to a tank who did it a few times already. Not only is the Warrior of Light an awesome enemy in the context of Shadowbringers content and story, but he's also a really well-implemented homage to the Warrior of Light of the whole Final Fantasy franchise, because not only are the designs super similar, but they're also both the first Warriors of Light. Pretty neat. Then Raha sacrifices himself as the entire expansion hinted that he would do, and basically our time in Norvrant is concluded. The Scions say their last goodbyes to the people they became close to while here, including one last little reunion between Seto and Ardbert. I might have cried just a tiny bit, but it's okay. Then the Scions put their minds and memories in little crystals, and we head back to Eorzea, where they're all reunited with their bodies. Amusingly, Thancred, Urianger, and Stola have all gotten used to their clothes and fighting styles in their time away and have decided to keep them. Now granted, this is probably a convenient excuse to keep them as viable trust NPCs, but in-universe it's a valid and humorous reason. Then our boy Raha returns to his younger body that we saw in the old 2.x Crystal Tower Alliance raid quests, and officially joins the team as a new Scion. Then the story finally closes with Xenos being weird and sitting in a dark room that assuredly has functioning lights, and his new Ascian friend reveals himself to be Fandaniel in the body of that little bitch Asahi. It seems to be a foregone conclusion now that Xenos will be the villain of the next expansion, but hopefully he's a little less one note this time around. If the patch had credits, they'd roll here, but yeah, that's officially the end of Shadowbringers, and what a fucking end it was. A great single-player instance, followed by a great dungeon, then finished off by an amazing trial. Excellent content. It was worth the 2 extra months of delays we had to suffer through thanks to the pandemic, but now the wait for the next big story update begins, where we should also see the end of the Eden raids. We're still a year off from the next expansion, but I'm eager for it. If only to finally get inside Garlemald and take the fight back to our enemy's home base. But then again, it seems like Xenos is very apathetic to the whole war thing. The 5.3 update is just great. I personally had Shadowbringers in my list of top 5 games of 2019, but honestly this update makes me consider cheating and putting it back in for this year as well. I didn't think they'd pull off such a definitive, satisfying end with one update, but they did. Everything was wrapped up in a nice little bow, and honestly, while I understand why some people might not like the idea of a whole expansion, taking the main character away from their core adventure in Eorzea and dropping them into a different adventure elsewhere, I think this was a necessary detour to fully expand on the nature of the Ascians, along with their origins and their motivations, because I wouldn't want them to just continue being mustache-twirling supervillains spouting contextless nonsense about their god or whatever. I know this ending might come off as predictable, but I would rather have predictability if it makes perfect sense, as opposed to surprises that might not. Because if there's one phrase I've grown to absolutely fucking despise in the last year and a half, it's subverting expectations. The entire Shadowbringers arc has been significantly more investing and emotional than the game has been since Heavensward. Stormblood has its fair share of high points, but nothing in it has gripped me as much as this. If anything, I'm kind of worried about returning to Eorzea and continuing the fight against Garlemald, because if the conflict is lackluster and Xenos is still one note despite pairing up with Fandaniel, it'll only look worse as a follow-up to 14's best expansion. This pretty much concludes my thoughts on 5.3. It was very satisfying, to say the least. I also want to acknowledge the excellent voice acting of both Elidibus and Lena. I think they both knocked it out of the park, performance-wise. Anyway, that's everything I have to say. I look forward to the next update and, of course, the next expansion. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you around.